They said the convent was holy ground, a sanctuary untouched by the corruption of the outside world. But behind the stone walls of Sacred Mercy in Edinburgh, in the bitter winter of 1834, something festered. On the morning of January 26th, the city awoke to a horror that would be quietly buried by both church and crown. 14 nuns, all in perfect health, were found dead in their beds serene. Untouched, no signs of trauma, no cause of death. Each wore a faint smile. Each clutched a parchment with one word: ascended. The physician called to the scene, Dr. Alistair Blackwood, recorded in his private notes what he dared not say aloud. No illness, no injury, no poison. They simply chose to die. But death is rarely so simple. And what truly happened in that convent was no mass suicide. It was the culmination of a ritual planned, precise, and terrifying. Hidden deep within the convent's archives, Dr. Muir uncovered letters, not between the sisters and their diocese, but from a man known only as Elias. His script was elegant, his words chilling. He spoke of spiritual engineering, of liberation from the flesh, of opening a gate to the higher realms. But Elias was no priest. He was a former theologian excommunicated for heresy, known for preaching that death was not an end, but an evolution. Muir's hands trembled as he read the final letter, dated 1 week before the deaths. The sisters are ready, Elias had written. They believe the calling is divine. At midnight on the 25th, they will become the bridge. Muir tried to alert the city's officials, but the church intervened swiftly. The bodies were buried in a massed grave, the convent sealed, the matter declared closed. Yet Dr. Muir continued his investigation in secret, and what he discovered was more horrifying than any plague or murder. Beneath the convent, a crypt hidden, ancient, and filled with symbols no sane man should draw held the truth. The sisters had not simply died. They had been prepared, conditioned, led to believe they were chosen to transcend. Their faith had been weaponized, their trust betrayed. This was not divine. It was calculated, ritualized, human, and the man behind it, Elias, had vanished, leaving only one note pinned to the chapel door. One gate opened, many more to come. This was no isolated tragedy. It was the first act in a design far larger and far darker than anyone dared to imagine. Dr. Alistair Muir could not sleep after that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them, the 14 nuns, lying in perfect stillness, as if suspended between life and death, their smiles serene, their eyes slightly open as though they had glimpsed something beyond human comprehension. He was a man of science, trained to seek reason in madness, but nothing in his education had prepared him for what he witnessed beneath. Sacred Mercy. It wasn't just the crypts, symbols etched deep into the stone like scars. It was what lay in the center. A stone altar, older than the convent itself, stained dark with something that was not quite blood, carved upon it in Latin: Mors porta vitae est, death is the gate of life. Muir felt the weight of centuries pressing on him, and he began to understand. Elias had not discovered this ritual. He had revived it. The church records, carefully concealed behind 4 centuries, hinted at a history far more disturbing. Sacred Mercy had not always been a convent. In the 1500s, it was a priory home to a splinter order, the Ordo Veritas Aeterna, known for their obsession with death, ascension, and the soul's liberation from the body. They believed that in orchestrated death, one could transcend the veil and return with power. The order had been purged in 1572, their leaders burned for heresy, their Writings destroyed all, so it was believed. But Elias had found them. Muir traced his origins to a seminary in southern France, where a young theologian named Elias Gray had been expelled for preaching the divine clarity of engineered death. The timeline matched. The philosophy was identical. Gray had not vanished. He had been preparing. Sacred mercy was merely his chosen ground. But Muir was no longer alone in his investigation. As word spread of his inquiries, men began following him, silent, well-dressed, eyes cold and calculating. He was warned, politely but firmly, to cease. "There are things you are not meant to uncover," a stranger whispered to him one evening. "Some truths are guarded by blood," yet Muir pressed on. He returned to the crypt, determined to find proof that the nuns had been manipulated, not chosen. But the crypt was empty, the altar gone. Only a single parchment lay where it had stood, bearing 2 words in Elias's hand. Next gate. The implication was clear. This was not over. It had only begun. Dr. Muir's hands trembled as he held the parchment. The words "next gate" burning into his mind like a brand. His breath caught in the stale, cold air of the empty crypt, and he realized with bone-deep dread that this was not merely the scene of a past crime. It was the beginning of something vast, orchestrated and ongoing. He had stumbled upon a fragment of a much larger design, one that reached beyond Edinburgh, beyond the convent, perhaps beyond the very borders of life and death. The question that clawed at his sanity was simple yet unbearable. What was the next gate, and who would open it? Muir returned to his study, determined to uncover Elias Gray's true purpose. Digging into forbidden records, journals of excommunicated monks, and banned theological treatises buried in the archives of Holyrood Abbey, what emerged was a chilling pattern of doctrine known as the Path of the 13th Veil. It was said that in every era, certain chosen communities were marked for transcendence through the ritual of perfect passage, where precisely 13 faithful souls would voluntarily cross the veil, opening a spiritual rift through which divine entities could step into the world. But always there was a 14th, a witness, a final sacrifice. Muir's blood ran cold as he realized the horror sister Elsbeth, the youngest nun who had survived the mass death, had since vanished without a trace. No records of her departure, no sightings, no burial. She was the 14th, not spared reserved. Somewhere she had joined Elias. Somewhere the next gate was being prepared. As Muir tried to alert the authorities, he encountered silence and obstruction. His letters went unanswered. His access to church records was revoked. He was followed, watched, and finally summoned to a meeting with the Archbishop himself. In a darkened chamber, the Archbishop's voice was low and final. "Leave this alone, Doctor. You were playing with fire that was buried for a reason." But in his eyes, Muir saw something far worse than denial fair. The Church knew, they had always known, and they were powerless to stop it. That night, Dr. Muir began his journal in earnest. He wrote, "This is not the tale of one man's madness, nor the tragedy of 14 dead nuns. This is the revelation of a design, ancient and precise, to open the boundaries of life and death by the hand of man. The gates are not myths, they are real, and one by one they are being opened." Dr. Muir's descent into the forbidden had now passed the point of return. The more he dug, the more he found that the deaths in Edinburgh were just one link in a chain that spanned centuries, even countenance. In his dimly lit study, walls lined with blackened manuscripts and maps marked in red ink. He uncovered references to prior passages in Toledo, 1600, Idozi, in Prague, 1741, in Lisbon, 1799, each event the same. 13 deaths in perfect health, one survivor who vanished, and the sudden collapse of religious institutions near the sites. The witnesses' names were nearly erased from history, the locations of their mass graves sealed, sanctified, and forgotten. The term Next Gate surfaced repeatedly in coded documents tied to a secretive order known as Custodes, Limond, the gatekeepers. These were no monks or priests. They were operatives embedded within the church and aristocracy, tasked not with stopping the gates, but with ensuring they opened at the right time. Dr. Muir could feel their eyes on him. His correspondence was being intercepted. His colleagues distanced themselves. One night, a note was slid beneath his door, written in the same cryptic hand as the parchment in the crypt. It read, "Watch the chapel bell." That night, unable to resist, Muir returned to the ruins of the convent. Midnight, the sky bruised with clouds, wind howling through the gravestones. He stood before the broken chapel, staring at the bell tower, and then movement. A figure in robes, pale and thin, moving like mist toward the crypt. Muir followed, heart hammering, down into the black again. The figure disappeared, but a sound remained, a bell toll, low and hollow, yet no bell was left in the tower. It came from below. A signal, Muir realized with horror Samine, was still performing the rites. The gate wasn't closed. It was opening again. He fled, but not before he saw it etched into the stone floor, beneath centuries of grimier symbol, a circle of 13 stars with one hollow center. The mark of the final gate. He had no choice now. The church would not help. The authorities would silence him. And whoever the gatekeepers were, they had already marked him. If he did not stop them, no one would. He would. Sleep abandoned Dr. Muir. Every sound in his home felt amplified. Distorted footsteps that weren't his, whispered prayers in a language he didn't know. The mark he saw on the crypt floor haunted his dreams. 13 stars with a hollow center, but it was not merely a symbol. It was a diagram, a map, a ritual structure. He pored over forbidden tomes in the university's restricted archives, texts no modern scholar dared reference aloud. One manuscript, Gicoilus Apecis on Open Heavens, spoke of celestial alignments that weakened the boundary between life and death, allowing for something to cross. The alignment had occurred once in 1834. It was due again soon. He calculated the date, the winter solstice, mere weeks away. Muir began to suspect that the convent deaths had not just been allowed, they had been orchestrated as a form of offering, the ritual deaths necessary to pierce the veil. But for whom? For what? The name Marcus Aldrich appeared repeatedly, linked. 2 letters hidden in the Vatican's black archives, an excommunicated theologian obsessed with death not as an end, but as a transformation. Aldrich had vanished in 1834, the same year as the Edinburgh tragedy. His writings revealed his obsession with the idea of a spiritual bridge, a passage between realms built upon faith, suffering, and consent. He called the final death in such rituals the fulcrum, the last to die, the one who opened the gate completely. The missing 14th sister, Muir's breath caught. She hadn't vanished. She had been taken, or worse transformed. As he read further, the text revealed something darker. The survivor was not random. She was chosen to become the vessel, the anchor between worlds, a bridge made flesh. Muir's hands trembled. Was she still alive? Or had she become something ... else? Suddenly, his candles flickered, casting shadows on the wall. One shadow moved differently, taller, thinner, its hands clasped in prayer. A whisper filled the room. The gate opens. Soon, Muir spun around. No one, just the cold. But the message was clear. He had only days to act. To uncover the truth behind Aldrich, the gatekeepers, and the ritual that had consumed 13 nuns and left one as the key. He scrawled a note in his journal, his pen cutting deep into the paper. The survivor is the key. If I find her... I find the truth. Dr. Muir's obsession consumed him, pulling him away from the living world into a labyrinth of the dead. He traced ancient records, ecclesiastical documents buried in the Church of Scotland's forbidden archive, sealed after the tragedy of 1834. But secrets rot in darkness, and Muir unearthed them with a scholar's hand and a zealot's heart. He found an unsigned letter, dated February 1834, from the office of Archbishop Kilpatrick. Its contents were chilling. The survivor remains in seclusion beneath St. Brigid's Abbey. She speaks in tongues no man recognizes. Her eyes remain open, though she does not see. We fear she has become a vessel beneath St. Brigid's. Muir knew the place. Now a ruin, it stood on the edge of the city like a scar, forgotten by time, unmarked by map. He ventured there at dawn, his breath visible in the cold. The abbey's remnants loomed against the sky, stones blackened by time and fire. Muir entered, passing beneath a crumbling arch etched with Latin. Nan Marima, said Transimus, we do not die but pass over. His footsteps echoed in the silence as he descended into the crypt. The air grew colder, denser, as if infused with centuries of breathless watching. At the crypt's center stood a stone sarcophagus, but this was no grave. Upon the lid was carved the symbol, 13 stars surrounding a void, and inscribed beneath, Sister Miriam of the Last Vigil, the 14th nun. Muir's pulse thundered. He reached out, touching the cold stone. It shifted just slightly. Heart racing, he pushed the lid aside, revealing not bone and dust, but a perfectly preserved body. Sister Miriam lay as if asleep, her hands folded in prayer, her face serene. But her eyes were open, and they moved. She stared at Muir, unblinking. Her lips parted, and in a voice dry as ash, she spoke. The gate is not yet closed. Muir staggered back, horror slicing through reason. She was alive or something. That mocked life. Suddenly, the air trembled, a low hum rising from the stone itself. Symbols carved into the crypt began to glow faintly, and then Muir understood. She had been waiting for someone to awaken her, for someone to finish what had begun in blood, faith, and silence. Muir's breath caught in his throat as the silence thickened, pressing against his chest like a hand. Sister Miriam remained unmoving, her eyes locked onto his, ancient and fathomless. The crypt pulsed with a vibration beyond sound, something felt in the marrow. Muir staggered backward, but the door through which he had entered now stood shut, as if it had never been open. On the stone walls, the symbols continued to glow, revealing patterns he couldn't comprehend. Spirals within circles, mirrored crosses, numbers without order. They burned into his mind, impossible to forget. Sister Miriam spoke again, her voice, stronger this time, layered with something not entirely human. You have come as the Watcher did before you. You seek knowledge, you seek truth, but truth has a price. Muir tried to speak, to demand answers, but his voice failed him. She continued, her hands now moving, unfurling as if unwrapping an unseen gift. 14 were called. 13 passed beyond. I remain bound to the gate. It must be sealed, or opened. Muir realized then what the nuns' deaths had truly been: not sickness, not suicide, but a ritual, an offering. The gate, whatever it was, required souls. A bridge from one world to another. He looked at Sister Miriam, this impossible relic of deathless existence, and understood that she was the anchor, the living keystone that held the boundary closed. And now that burden could be passed. You have read the letters, she whispered. You know the shepherd's hand. Muir's blood turned cold. The shepherd, a name that had haunted the archives. A man, or something, masquerading as a man who had orchestrated the mass deaths at the convent. The same handwriting, the same symbols, had appeared in records across Europe, trailing mass suicides, disappearances, and whispered rumors of gateways and awakenings. Miriam's hand reached toward him, palm open. Choose, she said, to know fully, to become the seal or the key. A vision struck Muir's mind like lightning. He saw the nuns gathered, not dead but transformed, waiting beyond a veil, calling to him with empty eyes. Their voices, unified, chanted one word: join. Muir fell to his knees, torn between fleeing and surrendering, but there was no escape. This was what he had sought: dangerous knowledge, the kind that once heard could never be forgotten or forgiven. Muir's knees trembled against the cold stone floor, his mind teetering between lucidity and something darker, something vast and ancient, clawing at the edges of his reason. Sister Miriam's outstretched hand remained before him, unwavering, her face a mask of serenity that concealed something far more ominous. Her eyes gleamed not with light, but with reflection, as if what looked through them was not entirely of this world. Seal or key, she repeated, and her voice now seemed to echo through the very bones of the crypt, as though the walls themselves breathed the words. Muir could feel the gravitational weight of what she was offering. It wasn't simply knowledge or death, it was transformation. He looked down at his hands, at the journal still clutched in his fingers, filled with his notes, diagrams, desperate scrawlings of a man unraveling. A man trying to force reason upon the unreasonable. And in that moment, the pages began to change. Words he had not written now appeared on them, identical to the script in the shepherd's letters. His own hand trembled, ink-stained, cursed. The shepherd's mark. Muir staggered back, heart hammering in panic. What is this? He rasped. Sister Miriam rose slowly, fluidly, without sound. She no longer seemed frail or ancient, but tall, imposing, timeless. He marked you, she said, the moment you began to seek. Those who look for him, find him. Muir's memories reeled his. Months of obsession, the sleepless nights, the whispers in the archives, the coincidences piling like bones. He thought he had discovered the shepherd, but he realized now he had been led, guided, conditioned, just as the nuns had been. The room spun as the truth hit him with crushing force. He was not the observer, he was the next vessel, the final piece in a ritual centuries in the making. The room's glow pulsed faster, symbols spinning in his vision, and Miriam's voice became a chant. Through knowledge comes submission. Through submission comes union. Behind her, shadows emerged, 12 figures, robed and silent, their faces obscured but familiar. The sisters, waiting, watching, and at the center of the circle stood the 13th Mother Superior, Elspeth. Her eyes locked with his, and her mouth formed a single word. Come. Muir realized the truth. Muir's scream caught in his throat, swallowed by the suffocating air of the crypt, thick with incense and decay. The circle of figures tightened around him, their movements inhumanly synchronized, silent, but for the rhythm of breath and heartbeats his own thundering in terror, and theirs unnaturally calm. Mother Superior Elspeth stepped forward, her pale hand lifting slowly, and in it she held a reliquant iron cross unlike any Christian symbol Muir had ever seen. Twisted, asymmetrical, inscribed with ancient markings that pulsed faintly in the candlelight, the same sigils carved on the walls, the same symbols Muir had traced in the shepherd's writings, believing them to be some forgotten language. But they weren't words, they were instructions. You were chosen, Elspeth intoned, her voice deeper now, resonant, as though thousands whispered through her, to complete the arc, to awaken the bridge. 13 to 1, 1 to many. Muir's mind reeled. This wasn't just a murder, ritual, it was something far older, far more calculated. The number 13, the symbol of transformation, of covenant. He had stumbled into a design so intricate that every action he had taken, the research, the arrival, the descent into this crypt, had been anticipated, engineered. Muir looked at his journal again, now glowing faintly. His own notes were no longer in his handwriting, they had transformed into the shepherd's script. His hands shook as he dropped the book, stepping back toward the crypt's exit. But the passage had vanished. Where once there was a stairwell, now stood a stone wall, etched with a single word, return. Panic surged through him. No, he gasped, you can't trap me. I didn't agree to this. Sister Miriam, now one with the others, replied with a smile devoid of warmth. You sought the forbidden. Now you are its vessel. The figures raised their hands in unison, and Muir felt a force not physical, but irresistible pulling him toward the center of the circle. His body trembled, not with fear, but with the beginning of something else. Visions flooded his mind of other rituals, in other places, other centuries. Always 13, always the shepherd, always one outsider who believed he had discovered the mystery, when in truth he had been written into it. He was not uncovering history, he was becoming it. And above all, he finally understood the crime, not murder, but transmutation of the human soul into something not meant for this world. Muir's scream never left his lips. His voice was stolen by the force enveloping him, an ancient current of will, not his own, coursing through his veins, rewriting the very fabric of his identity. The circle of sisters chanted now, their voices layering in tones both celestial and monstrous, forming a harmony not meant for human ears. His mind fractured under the pressure of the sound, each note unlocking memories, not his own glimpses, of the shepherd's past lives, rituals performed across continents and centuries, in cloisters, caves, cathedrals. He saw the blood of martyrs mingled with ink on vellum scrolls, saw empires rise and fall around hidden sanctuaries where the faithful were prepared, conditioned for the crossing. The figures closed in, their faces no longer distinct as individuals, but mirrors of something eternal. Muir fell to his knees, hands pressed to the stone floor, now warm with energy pulsing beneath. His fingers traced the grooves of the sigils, which glowed with his touch. He realized the truth with a sickening clarity. He wasn't trapped by them. He had been made for this. His obsession with the forbidden, the way he had sacrificed everything, area, family, sanity for knowledge. It had all been part of the shaping. The shepherd needed a vessel not born in faith, but forged in pursuit. A scholar, a seeker, a man desperate enough to see himself as savior, never suspecting he was the key. You brought the final word, Mother Elspeth intoned, holding up Muir's journal, its pages now bled with red ink, the text forming a spiral, inreadable, yet deeply understood. You are the 13th and the first. The stone beneath Muir cracked with a thunderous groan. From the depths below, a light surged a blinding, golden force tinged with crimson. It was not divine. It was hunger incarnate, a portal, not to heaven, not to hell, but to the in-between, a place of endless consciousness where the shepherd waited, not as a man, but as an idea eternal, patient and ravenous for the faithful. Muir felt his soul split, part of him pulled downward, another ascending, both torn from the man he once was. This was no death. This was assimilation. And in his final thought, Muir understood the crime, not the deaths of the sisters, but the annihilation of self, willingly offered on the altar of enlightenment. Twisted into control, the villagers awoke to the tolling of the convent bell slow, rhythmic and impossibly loud, despite the storm still raging above the hills. No one had rung it in years. No one dared. Yet the sound pierced the morning fog like a funeral dirge for souls already forgotten. Those who lived closest to the convent claimed they saw light bursting from the chapel's highest window light, not of fire, but of something otherworldly, pulsing like a heartbeat. And then silence. An unnatural, suffocating stillness. When authorities arrived 2 days later, led by Sheriff Calder and a small retinue of parish investigators, they found the front gate open, swinging on rusted hinges. Inside, the halls were lined with candles, still burning though no one remained to tend them. The air was thick with incense and decay. The chapel door had been barred from within, yet swung open at the sheriff's touch. What they found stopped every man cold. 14 bodies, arranged in a perfect circle around the altar. Hands clasped, eyes closed, their faces radiating a bliss no man could fake. No signs of violence, no illness. Just peace so profound it mocked the horror of the scene. In the center lay William Muir, arms outstretched as if crucified upon the stone floor, the journal resting on his chest. Every page filled, though the ink was fresh. The language, however, was unreadable, some hybrid of Latin, Gaelic, and symbols no scholar could decipher. Sheriff Calder, a man hardened by war and law, swore he heard whispering soft voices calling from the walls, not mournful, but joyful, as if welcoming him to join. He ordered the place sealed. His report to Edinburgh was simple. Tragedy at St. Dimphnas, cause unknown, victims at peace. But that peace was a lie. In the months that followed, Calder changed. His nights filled with visions of the circle, the light, the chanting. He began to write compulsively, symbols matching those in Muir's journal. His wife found him one dawn, standing in their barn, a rope in hand, eyes alight with ecstasy. He whispered, "They've shown me the truth. Death is the doorway." The village never spoke of the convent again. The building was razed, the land left fallow, but those who venture near the cemetery claim they feel eyes watching. And the bell, long since destroyed, still rings on stormy nights. But the bell was only the beginning. 6 months after the raising of St. Dymphna's Convent, a scholar from Glasgow, Dr. Elias Granger, arrived in Edinburgh carrying a single item, the recovered journal of William Muir. How it had escaped destruction was unclear. Granger claimed it had come to him in a parcel with no return address, wrapped in cloth that reeked of incense and mildew. The wax seal bore the insignia of an ancient order, the cross of Lorraine entwined with a serpent, a symbol known to few, and feared by the initiated. Granger, a man of rational mind and scholarly precision, was intrigued. He began decoding the journal's cryptic language, cross-referencing forgotten tomes in the university's restricted archives. What he found chilled him. Muir had documented not merely the sisters' descent into death, but the method. Initiation process masked as religious devotion, a ritual spanning months, its goal not death, but transcendence. The convent had been selected not for its piety, but for its isolation. The sisters had been prepared, conditioned through chants, fasting, and symbols carved into the very walls of the chapel sigils. Granger recognized from ancient rites, condemned by both church and crown. The journal detailed nightly gatherings, where the sisters meditated in silence, while Muir read from texts forbidden by canon law books, thought lost or destroyed during the Reformation. The final entry, written in a hand no longer Muir's its style feminine, yet forceful read, "The circle is unbroken. The veil has lifted. We have stepped through. Light consumes us." And then a signature. Not Muir's, not the mother. Superior's, just a symbol. The sign cross. Granger, shaken, brought the journal to the university's board. They dismissed it as fabrication, warning him not to pursue a hoax. But Granger, now obsessed, followed a trail of similar deaths. Across Europe, monasteries, convents, cultic enclaves, always the same pattern: isolation, devotion, ecstasy, death. Always peaceful, always unexplained, and always, in the ruins, the Pencross. What began as a mystery of 14 dead nuns became a question far darker. Who was behind these deaths? And why had they spanned centuries, continents, and creeds? Granger knew he had seen only the edge of something vast, a hidden design, not of man, but of an order older than kingdoms. Granger's investigation led him deep into the underbelly of Europe's forgotten religious orders, where whispers of the Serpent Cross were spoken only in hushed tones, if at all, in the shadowed corridors of Prague's Clementinum Library. He found a single reference in a 14th century codex group called Custodes Lucius, the Keepers of Light. But the name was a misdirection. They didn't worship light. They controlled those who sought it. The Codex described their origins in the aftermath of the First Crusade, born from schisms between Templar factions. While the Church sought wealth and relics, the Custodes sought knowledge forbidden even by God's emissaries' techniques of soul manipulation, psychic conditioning, and the ultimate goal, to breach the veil between life and death without divine permission. They believed in engineered transcendenza, breaking of the human soul from flesh through collective will, guided not by angels but by those who had passed before. Their method: isolate, indoctrinate, and release. And the key to that process: faith, not mere belief, but total surrender. Granger cross-checked dates. Everywhere the Custodes operated, communities died in unison: monks, nuns, pilgrims, always framed as holy miracles, always documented in church records as visits from the divine. And in each case, a lone outsider, often a doctor, sometimes. A scribe survived to tell the tale, only to be ignored or discredited. The pattern was clear. St. Dimphnas was not an anomaly. It was part of a cycle, and Muir, he hadn't been a simple chronicler. He had been chosen to bear witness, to document the success of the rite and ensure its secrecy. But someone had betrayed that secrecy. Someone had sent the journal to Granger. He traced the parcel's origin to a port in Antwerp, but beyond that, the trail vanished. Granger was not deterred. He published his findings in an obscure journal of comparative theology, disguising it as fiction. The article gained little attention, save for a cryptic letter he received weeks later, unsigned, containing a single line: "You are seeing only the shadow. The hand remains unseen." That night, Granger's apartment burned to the ground. He survived, barely, but the journal was lost. And as he stood in the ruins, he realized something with bone-deep certainty. He had touched a web of control older than empires, and its weaver was still alive, still watching. Granger disappeared for nearly 2 years after the fire. Official records list him as traveling across Eastern Europe and the Ottoman territories. But no passport stamps remain, no receipts, no companions. What emerged from those missing years, however, was a man utterly transformed, paranoid, gaunt, but burning with knowledge he refused to share publicly. His private journals, discovered decades later in the attic of a forgotten boarding house in Trieste, revealed that he had found the last living member of the Custodes, Lucis, a man who called himself Father Callistus. They met in the ruins of a monastery near Thessaloniki, its walls scorched, its altars overturned, as if history itself had tried to erase it. Callistus was old, ageless, Granger noted, his eyes like glass, his voice a whisper that carried. "Wait, you seek truth," Callistus said, "but truth is a blade without a hilt. It will cut your soul in half." Granger recorded every word of what followed. Callistus confessed that the Custodes had infiltrated not just monasteries and convents, but entire dioceses, embedding their rituals within accepted religious practice. Every mass death, every miraculous visitation had been a field test, a step toward their final goal, the Ascension Concordat, a singular event that would bridge the worlds permanently, uniting the living and the dead in one spiritual organism. Ruled by those who had mastered death, Callistus described the process in detail, a cycle of 13, always 13, to represent the sacred union of the 12 apostles with the divine -1, the betrayer, who must always remain to witness. Muir was our Judas, Callistus admitted, and now you, Granger, carry the same burden. Granger tried to press for more, but Callistus vanished into the night, leaving behind only a symbol carved into the monastery's stone floor. The same serpent cross, but inverted, coiled around an eye. Granger fled Thessaloniki the next day, certain he was being followed. In his journal, he wrote, "They are not a cult. They are not a conspiracy. They are the architects of faith itself." That line was underlined 3 times in red ink. By the time Granger returned to Edinburgh, his hair had gone white. He attempted to warn the university's clergy, to alert historians, but found doors closed, reputations threatened, funding withdrawn. Within months, he was discredited, labeled insane. But his journals survived, and now you know the truth, or at least the edge of it. The rest lies in darkness, waiting. In the winter of 1839, Granger disappeared from Edinburgh. Some said he had gone mad, others whispered he had been taken by the same forces he had uncovered. What no one expected was his reappearance 1 year later, emaciated, frostbitten, and bearing a sealed manuscript. He arrived at the office of Dr. Ewan MacRae, an obscure professor of comparative theology, and collapsed on the floor, muttering only one word: complete. That manuscript, known now as the Granger Codex, contains the most disturbing record of events ever withheld from public knowledge. It describes a journey to an island off the coast of Ireland, a place unmarked on any map, known only by its Gaelic name, Annam Brist, the Broken Soul. There, Granger claimed to have found the true seat of the Custodes, Lucis, not a monastery or church, but a subterranean temple carved into the very rock, ancient beyond comprehension. He descended with a group of hired fishermen, none of whom returned. Inside, he wrote, the air pulsed with sound, a low, continuous hum, like a chant beneath the threshold of hearing. The walls were etched with scenes of transformation, not resurrection, but disintegration. Bodies becoming light, then shadow, then something else. He described an altar of bone and obsidian, upon which rested 14 identical death masks, each molded in wax, each bearing the face of one of the dead nuns from St. Matilda's convent. But it was the final chamber that broke him. There, in a pool of still water, he saw his own face reflected, and behind him, the figures of those same nuns, standing in silence, watching. He turned to find nothing. But the water would not lie. They were waiting, he wrote, not for me, but for what I carried: knowledge, memory, the final piece. On the wall above the pool, he found a phrase inscribed in Latin: Fiat lux, in tenebris let, there be light in the darkness. But below it, scratched more crudely, was another message: the shepherd returns. Granger fled the island, pursued by something unseen, and returned to Edinburgh to deliver the codex. He died the next day. His heart burst in his chest, yet no signs of struggle or trauma. Dr. MacRae, now in possession of this forbidden knowledge, sealed the manuscript and vanished from public life. His final note: the cycle begins anew. One shepherd falls, another rises, and now this knowledge is yours. Guard it well, or risk becoming part of the next cycle. Dr. MacRae's disappearance in 1841 was not noted in any official register. No obituary, no funeral, no inquiry. Only a single letter sent to his closest colleague, Father Alistair Menzies, a Jesuit scholar in Glasgow. That letter, found years later in a locked drawer, contained just 3 lines. The codex is secured. The door must remain shut. Beware the man who walks with no shadow. The phrase echoed in occult circles for decades. Some claimed it referred to a spiritual metaphor. Others insisted it described a real person, someone who had stepped beyond the veil and returned altered. In 1857, almost 20 years after the events at St. Matilda's, reports emerged from Vienna of a religious order known as Die Kinder des Lichts, the Children of Light. This secretive group, operating under the guise of a charitable mission, was accused of indoctrinating young novices into a system of belief that mirrored the theology described in Granger's Codex. Central to their doctrine was the belief in divine completion, a state achievable only through release from the physical form. Again, deaths followed. 12 initiates, found in a cavern beneath the city, their bodies arranged in a circle, faces frozen in bliss. Each clutched a parchment, a single word inked upon it: lumen, light. The Austrian authorities, unable to explain the phenomena, dismissed it as mass hysteria, never linking it to the events in Edinburgh. But a traveller named Samuel Greaves, an American theologian, obtained fragments of the Viennese inquest. His private notes, found posthumously in 1880, referenced an individual who had visited both Edinburgh and Vienna during the times of the deaths, a man named Aldrich, Marcus Aldrich, the shepherd. Greaves described Aldrich as charming, ageless, with eyes that seemed to see the soul. He wore no religious garb, no symbol, only a simple pendant, a circle bisected by a single vertical line. Aldrich, it seemed, had moved across Europe, spreading his doctrine, refining his methods, preparing for something larger. Greaves tracked his movements for years, documenting a trail of cloistered communities, each touched by mysterious deaths, each falling deeper into the shadow of divine completion. In every case, Aldrich arrived before the death sand vanished. After, his control was absolute, his influence undeniable, yet his presence could never be proven. Greaves wrote, "He preaches light, but brings only the silence of the grave, and still they follow him." The stage was set for the greatest tragedy yet. In 1862, a quiet convent nestled in the Black Forest of Germany reported the death of 15 nuns in a single night. Once again, the bodies bore no sign of trauma, only serene expressions and identical notes clutched in their hands. A lucked The deaths triggered a minor inquiry by the Prussian authorities, but political tensions overshadowed the case, and it was quickly buried. Yet among the scattered belongings of the deceased, investigators found a book bound in dark leather and sealed with a wax sigil, the same circle and line symbol Aldrich was known to carry. Inside were pages upon pages of ritualistic instructions, meditations, and detailed psychological triggers, all designed to erode personal identity and instill absolute obedience to the shepherd's path. These were not holy writings. They were weaponized beliefs, engineered to convert faith into a mechanism of separation. Across the ocean in Boston, 1865, Dr. Nathaniel Rowe, a scholar of religious psychology, began compiling data from such deaths across Europe. He noticed disturbing consistencies, similar words, postures, expressions, and the presence of a mysterious figure described in various forms. A teacher, a prophet, a man with no past. Rowe's investigation intensified when he received a package without a return address inside, an old daguerreotype photograph of a man standing with nuns outside a convent in Italy, dated 1851, on the back. A chilling message: he walks with them still. Rowe, driven by both fear and curiosity, compared the image to sketches from the Edinburgh case and portraits from Vienna. The man was always the same, ageless, serene, and terrifyingly calm Marcus Aldrich. The shepherd's presence had transcended borders and languages, always preaching transcendence, always leaving death behind. But Rowe discovered something more: letters from Aldrich to an unnamed follower, detailing plans for America. The vast, isolated communities of frontier religious groups were the perfect ground for his final design, a mass convergence, where hundreds, perhaps thousands, would step into the light together. He called it the Great Awakening, a euphemism for mass-engineered death, wrapped in divine language. The final letter was dated 1861. "Soon the chorus shall rise, and the doorway shall open. All must gather, all must be complete." The plan was in motion, and the final stage would not be whispered in cloisters, but sung in unison by a people led blindly into the abyss. Rowe realized he wasn't documenting history, he was racing against a doctrine that was about to consume America. Rowe knew he had little time. The patterns pointed westward to the vast open lands of Utah, where isolated religious sects had begun settling. Communities bound by obedience, faith, and a hunger for divine purpose. If Aldrich had chosen a stage for his final act, this would be it. Rowe departed Boston under a veil of secrecy. His research hidden within the lining of his coat, traveling by rail, then horseback, until he reached a settlement known only as Providence Vale. The town wasn't on any map, and its inhabitants, when questioned, claimed they'd always lived there, though no birth records or official documents existed. Providence Vale was pristine, almost unnaturally so, its whitewashed buildings and orderly gardens feeling more like a set than a town. The people smiled too much, moved too smoothly as if rehearsed, and everywhere on doors, books, and clothing the same symbol, a circle bisected by a single vertical line. Rowe's blood ran cold. He'd seen this mark on the book from the Black Forest, on Aldrich's letters, on the floor of the Sacred Heart Chapel. The shepherd was here. Under the pretense of a traveling scholar, Rowe was granted shelter in the local meeting house. That night, unable to sleep, he crept through the building, finding a locked room in the basement. Breaking the latch, he stepped. Inside found walls covered in diagrams of human skulls, maps of emotional centers in the brain, and detailed plans for something titled The Great Gathering. At the room's center, a table held rows of identical journals, each one filled with names, dates, and phrases repeated over and over. Shed the flesh, join the light, embrace completion. These were not random writings. They were script's mantras, designed to erode willpower, dissolve identity, and replace it with obedient submission. As Rowe flipped through the pages, he found a list of names. The final name chilled him. Rowe, Nathaniel, witness. The door creaked open behind him. Turning slowly, he came face to face with a man he recognized from the photographer man. Who should have aged, who should not have been alive. Marcus Aldrich smiled and said, "You arrived, as expected. Shall we begin?" In that moment, Rowe realized he was not a hunter. He was prey, summoned by the shepherd to bear witness to the final act of mass surrender of souls, orchestrated with the precision of a conductor leading his choir into darkness. Aldrich's presence was not that of a man aged by time, but of something preservedless, patient and cold. His eyes, a pale and icy blue, bore into Rowe's soul with the dispassionate curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen. "You came to stop this," Aldrich said, stepping forward, "but what you fail to understand is that it cannot be stopped. It has already begun." Rowe's mind raced. He had imagined confrontation, imagined exposing Aldrich's crimes, imagined warning these people, but in that moment, stripped of control, he understood the depth of Aldrich's plan. This was not merely about a cult. It was a systema philosophy, engineered to override the primal human fear of death and replace it with a longing for it. Aldrich reached for one of the journals on the table and handed it to Rowe. Inside were sketches of Providence, Vale not as it was, but as it would be. A mass ceremony, cloaked in music and light, where the entire population would transcend. Rowe's own name was written under the final heading. Conversion complete. Aldrich spoke calmly. "You are here because you are ready, not to stop it, but to document it. Your writings will carry this knowledge beyond these walls." Rowe realized, with terror, that Aldrich did not fear exposure. He craved it. He wanted his methods known, his blueprint of control disseminated into the wider world. This was not just a mass death. It was the birth of a doctrine, a new order, where faith was not chosen, but constructed. Rowe stepped back, trying to escape, but Aldrich merely gestured to the door. "Go," he said. "But know this once, you've seen the truth, you will never unsee it. You are already part of the circle." Rowe fled the building and ran through the darkened streets of Providence Vale, the moon casting unnatural shadows. Across the ground, he passed houses where soft chanting echoed through closed windows. The town was preparing, not with panic but with devotion. As dawn approached, Rowe rode away from the valley, vowing to warn the world. But in his mind, the voices lingered. Shed the flesh, join the light, embrace completion. He could still hear them calling. It wasn't over. It had only just begun. Miles away from Providence Vale, Jonathan Rowe stumbled into a village soaked in sweat and panic. The innkeeper found him muttering incoherently about death, light, and the sound of voices that didn't belong to the living. Though he was offered a room and rest, sleep never came. Every time Rowe closed his eyes, he saw Aldrich's face come certain, and watching him from beyond the veil, he wrote feverishly through the night, chronicling every word, every detail of the cult's design, as though getting it down might purge it from his mind. But something deeper had shifted in him. The more he wrote, the more he felt the seductive pull of Aldrich's vision, a world without pain, without decay, without fear. His logical mind resisted, but a part of him, infected by what he'd seen, began to understand why they had chosen death. And that was the trap Aldrich had laid. Not for the body, but for the soul. Rowe realized the horror. Aldrich didn't need to kill his enemies. He needed only to let them witness his creation. Exposure was the infection. He had turned faith into a virus of the mind. As the sun rose, Rowe attempted to send his writings to the authorities. But the mailman who collected his letters glanced at the addresses, then quietly pocketed them without promise of delivery. Rowe's instinct screamed that Aldrich's reach extended far beyond Providence Vale. His web of followers was not confined to that mountain town. It had spread, silently, invisibly, into places of power and communication. Rowe tried to leave, to flee the region, but at every train station, every carriage house, there was delay, excuse, or strangely knowing glances from strangers who seemed to recognize him. It was as though he had been marked, not physically, but spiritually. He was no longer an outsider. Aldrich's plan had succeeded. The ritual was only the beginning. The true goal was dissemination, the planting of seeds in the minds of those who would carry his dark gospel to new ground. That night, Rowe again heard the chanting, this time in his own voice, in his own thoughts. He hadn't escaped. He had been transformed. The final horror dawned on him in silence. Providence Vale had never needed walls or weapons. Jonathan Rowe's descent was not sudden, it was gradual, deliberate, and insidious. In the following weeks, he became consumed by Aldrich's writings, which he had stolen from the convent and carried with him like sacred texts. He told himself he was studying them to expose the truth, to warn others, but deep inside, he felt something shifting, something irreversible. The language Aldrich used, the symbols and phrases, began to appear in Rowe's dreams. He saw the same circle of 13 cloaked figures standing around an altar of bone and stone. Each time he was drawn closer to the center of the circle, and each time he awoke with blood dripping from his nose and the word chosen. carved into the condensation on his window. The physical world around him, warped faces in crowds, seemed distorted. Voices behind him whispered truths he couldn't ignore. He tried to destroy the writings, burning them in a churchyard, but they would not burn. The fire hissed and recoiled, leaving the pages untouched, as if protected by unseen forces. Rowe began to realize that Aldrich's work had tapped into something ancient, something not born of mere human will, but older, darker, and beyond comprehension. The concept of death as a gateway was not new. It had been whispered in forbidden rites, hidden scrolls, and ancient cults long buried by time and fear. Aldrich had resurrected this knowledge and refined it. What began as psychological manipulation had become something more, something metaphysical. One evening, Rowe received a visitor, a man cloaked in black, wearing a ring inscribed with a serpent eating its own tail, the same sigil Rowe had seen etched into the convent's altar. The man spoke only a sentence: "He has chosen you to continue the work." Then he handed Rowe a sealed envelope and vanished into the night. Inside was a map, not of Providence Vale, but of other towns, other religious communities marked with red circles. At the center of the map, a single word: awaken. Rowe now stood at a crossroads. He could flee, attempt to expose the dark machinery still grinding beneath the surface of society, or he could surrender to the call, to the purpose, to the terrifying clarity of Aldrich's vision. And somewhere, far away, hidden from sight, a figure watched in silence, knowing that the seed had taken root. The work, indeed, would continue. Rowe's mind teetered on the edge of collapse. Yet it was not fear that haunted him now, it was purpose. A perverse clarity filled him in the wake of the stranger's visit. For days he did not sleep, did not eat, surviving on the cold fire that burned inside his soul. He pored over the map, the coordinates, the symbols marked in red ink, like wounds across the nation's spiritual heart. Each site was a potential stage of theatre for the next act in Aldrich's unholy drama. And at the center of it all, one location stood out. Not a church or convent, but an asylum, long abandoned, in the hills outside Boston. It had once been a place for the broken men and women deemed too shattered to function in the civilized world. Now, it seemed to call out to him. When Rowe arrived, the asylum loomed over him like a tombstone, cracked and crumbling, but still pulsing with a malign energy. He entered through the rotted doors and descended into the basement where the shadows were thickest. There, he found the remnants of something old, a circular chamber with walls scrawled in ancient languages. The floor painted with a faded sigil identical to Aldrich's ring. And in the center, a lectern upon which rested a journal. It was not Aldrich's hand that filled these pages, but someone older. Rowe flipped through trembling fingers, reading about rites conducted in this place a century before Aldrich's time. Sacrifices to open the veil, rituals to summon the dead, ceremonies to sever the soul from the flesh. Aldrich had not created this method. He had inherited it. And in that moment, Rowe understood. Aldrich was merely a vessel, a willing pawn, in a game that had begun long before his birth. And now, Rowe was next. As he stood in that cold, airless chamber, a voice echoed in his mind, not spoken, but felt. Become the shepherd. Lead them to the gate. It was not a suggestion, it was a command. And when Rowe looked down, he realized his hands were no longer shaking. His fear was gone. His doubt was gone. In its place, devotion, the same kind that had claimed the Sisters of Sacred Heart, the same that would now claim many more. The machinery was in motion. The gateway was not closed. And Jonathan Rowe had just stepped into the role he was born to fulfill. The asylum had become a cathedral of darkness, its crumbling walls now cloaked in purpose. Jonathan Rowe walked its halls with the calm resolve of a man who had surrendered, entirely not to madness, but to destiny. What had begun as an investigation had become an initiation. The writings in the ancient journal spoke of a cycle, a lineage of shepherds, each chosen by the unseen force that hungered beyond the veil. Aldrich had been only the most recent. Rowe was now the next. The ritual did not require faith in the divine, only submission to the design. He understood now why the nuns had smiled in death. It wasn't ecstasy or peace. It was the relief of finally letting go, of becoming part of something greater, something eternal. Rowe knew what had to be done. The journal gave precise instructions how to select the new congregation, how to implant the thought seeds, how to erode their resistance through isolation, repetition, and the promise of transcendence. It was not religion, it was engineering. And the next target was already chosen. An isolated mountain community, deeply religious, already steeped in apocalyptic prophecy. Rowe spent weeks preparing, sending letters, as Aldrich once had, under a new name, a new identity. He would arrive, not as an investigator, but as a guide, a prophet. He would not need to convince them to die. He would only need to awaken what already slumbered within their souls, the longing to escape the weight of this world. The night before his departure, Rowe returned to the asylum's basement chamber. He stood in the center of the faded sigil, the journal clutched in one hand, a candle in the other. Around him, the shadows pulsed like breathing lungs. He spoke the words etched into the wall's ancient phrases from a language lost to time. The air thickened, humming with unseen presence. The veil stirred, and in that moment, Rowe felt them, the sisters, Aldrich, the unknown shepherds before him. They were all there, watching, waiting, not gone, not dead, transformed. Soon, Rowe whispered, his voice joining the chorus in his mind. Soon, the gate will open. As he left the asylum behind, its silhouette swallowed by the mist, Jonathan Rowe was no longer a man. He was a tool, sharpened and ready, forged by a history of blood and belief into a weapon of perfect purpose. The next chapter had begun. The town of Black Hollow lay hidden in the Appalachian Mountains, cut off from the modern world by choice, tradition, and terrain. Its people were bound together by faith, but not in any denomination recognized by the outside world. Their church had no name, their scriptures handwritten and passed down through generations. They believed the world was ending not in fire or flood, but in forgetting, and only those who preserved the old ways would transcend the decay of modernity. Jonathan Rowe arrived under the name Elias Crane, carrying with him nothing but a weathered Bible and the journal, now concealed within the covers of a sacred text. He was welcomed not as a stranger, but as a fulfillment. Their prophecy had spoken of a guide, a man who would come from beyond the mountains, bearing knowledge lost to time. The elders called him the bearer. Rowe wasted no time, he observed. Their rituals, studied their fears, learned their songs. Then, slowly, he began to alter them. A word here, a phrase there, subtle changes, almost imperceptible. He introduced the concept of the Great Crossing, a passage not through death, but through transformation. The congregation accepted it easily. They had always believed that this world was a test, a shadow of the real life to come. Rowe's words only gave shape to what they already hoped. He spoke of purity, of shedding the burdens of flesh to become vessels of divine purpose. The people of Black Hollow listened, enraptured. He watched as their eyes took on the same distant glow he had seen in Sister Mary Agnes. Their dreams began to shift. Children spoke of the light beyond, and elders claimed to hear the voices of departed kin calling them home. The conditioning was working faster than Rowe had anticipated. He used isolation, no letters, no visitors, repetition, daily gatherings, nightly chants, and suggestion, visions, signs, all carefully arranged. They trusted him completely, but Rowe felt no triumph, only a cold inevitability. He had become what Aldrich had been, a harbinger of quiet annihilation. The date of the crossing was set, the winter solstice, when the veil was thinnest. The congregation would gather in the chapel, where they would offer themselves in unity. Not death they believed, but liberation, and Rowe would lead them, not as a man, but as the shepherd. The ritual would be complete. The cycle would continue, and the world. The final week before the solstice was drenched in silence, a stillness that seemed unnatural even for Black Hollow. No birds sang, the wind had died. Time itself seemed to stretch, as though the world were holding its breath for something it could not name. Rowe, now fully immersed in the persona of the shepherd, walked the village with a calm that belied the storm within him. He had become both priest and predator, revered by those who would soon follow him into the unknown. The journal, once a document of warning, had transformed into a manual, its pages filled with precise instructions, timelines, psychological triggers. He knew exactly how each villager would respond, and they did. One by one, they began withdrawing from daily life, focusing solely on preparation, fasting, prayer, ritual cleansing. The children were taught to sing a haunting hymn. Rowe had written it. Melody eerily similar to one sung in Sacred Heart nearly a century earlier. At night, Rowe wandered the chapel alone, haunted by visions he could no longer dismiss as illusion. He heard voices, whispers rising from beneath the floorboards, a chorus of those who had come before. Faces flickered at the edge of candlelight. Sisters, monks, parishioners, all staring, watching, waiting, not with malice, but with expectation, as though he were now part of something ancient, a lineage of those who had led the faithful into the darkness. On the eve of the solstice, Rowe gathered the congregation for a final address. He stood before them, the chapel aglow with candlelight. Every face turned toward him with trust, so absolute it felt like a noose tightening around his soul. "Tomorrow," he intoned, "we shall cross the threshold together. Freed from this decaying world, we shall rise as one into the eternal light." The people wept not in fear, but in joy. To them, he was salvation. To himself, he was perdition. Alone that night, Rowe sat at the altar, writing the final entry in the journal. "They are ready," he scrawled, "and I am beyond redemption." He left the book open, a testament for any who might find it, a key to understanding the horror that would unfold. As dawn approached, Rowe lit the candles one by one, their flames dancing like spirits come to bear witness. The people gathered silently, dressed in white, eyes alight with faith. The ritual had begun, and there was no turning back. The solstice sun never rose. A pall of dark, heavy clouds blanketed Black Hollow, as if nature itself refused to bear witness to what was about to occur. Inside the chapel, every candle had been lit, their flames flickering against the stone walls like restless souls trapped between worlds. Rowe stood before his congregation, eyes hollow, face pale, and voice calm with terrifying conviction. "This is the hour," he said. "The veil is thinnest now. Let us cross together." The villagers knelt, whispering prayers that blended into a single, mournful chant. It was a sound not of fear, but of devotion, a haunting melody that echoed through the chapel, carried on the breath of those who would soon be no more. At the altar, Rowe unveiled a silver chalice, one that had belonged to Mother Superior Brennan, preserved for decades by unseen hands. He raised it slowly, filled with a dark liquid that shimmered unnaturally in the candlelight. The people came forward, one by one, each drinking, each bowing in silent reverence. It was not poison, but a powerful sedative, enough to still the mind, enough to guide them gently into the silence. As they drank, Rowe's heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of inevitability. The ritual was nearly complete. As the last villager drank and took their place among the kneeling faithful, Rowe stepped back, watching as one by one they slipped into unconsciousness, their bodies still, their faces serene. He walked among them, whispering a final benediction, his voice trembling. "You are chosen, you are free." Only one chalice remained his own, but Rowe hesitated. In that moment, he heard the voices again, not the whispers of the dead, but the cries of the living, echoes of those who had followed. Before him, cries twisted by regret, by betrayal. He stared at the chalice in his hands, its surface reflecting his face, a man, no longer priest, no longer shepherd, but executioner. He dropped it, the chalice shattered, the sound piercing the silence like a scream. Rowe fell to his knees, surrounded by the lifeless forms of those who had trusted him completely. He was alone. The ritual was broken, and for the first time, the voices stopped. Silence reclaimed Black Hollow, and the weight of his crimes fell upon him like a tombstone. The veil had not lifted. The threshold remained closed. The dead did not rise, and Rowe wept not for them, but for himself. The aftermath was a grotesque tableau of faith betrayed. Rowe sat motionless in the center of the chapel, the cold seeping through the stone floor into his bones. Around him, the villagers lay in unnatural stillness, their faces frozen in peace they would never understand. Hours passed, though time had lost all meaning. The sun never rose that day, and darkness pressed against the stained glass like a living thing. Rowe's mind cracked under the weight of silence. He began to hear them again, faint echoes at first, then louder, clearer, not voices of the dead, but of judgment. He turned his eyes to the altar, where Brennan's journal lay open, its ink faded, its words still etched with insanity. In it, he found the final entry, a warning. There is no door. There is only a mirror. And in it, we see our own corruption, magnified until it consumes us. Rowe screamed, the sound devoured by the chapel walls. He stumbled to his feet, staggered into the corridor, desperate to escape the presence of those he had led to their deaths, but there was no escape. The doors had sealed themselves, swollen shut with damp and rot. Windows were too narrow to climb through. He was a prisoner of his own design. In the mirror of Brennan's words, Rowe saw himself, no shepherd, no prophet, but a man who had mistaken obsession for revelation. And still, the silence grew heavier, thicker, as though the very air condemned him. Days passed. Rowe did not eat, did not sleep. He wandered the convent like a ghost, speaking to shadows, pleading with the cold stone for forgiveness. He sat beside the dead, holding their hands, whispering promises of resurrection he no longer believed. Finally, on the seventh night, he returned to the chapel. He lit the candles once more, though his hands trembled. He gathered the broken pieces of the chalice and placed them on the altar. Then he wrote his final confession in the margins of Brennan's journal. I see it now. There was never any calling, only my hunger to be chosen. I used them to feed my hunger, cloaked in scripture, wrapped in lies. May God damn me, for I cannot. When they found him months later, the chapel was silent, the bodies perfectly preserved by cold and decay. And Rohi was kneeling at the altar, his eyes open, staring at nothing, a smile carved on his lips, identical to theirs. What followed was erasure. The church descended upon the convent with the quiet efficiency of an institution practiced in burying its dead and its secrets. Investigators, priests, and doctors arrived under the veil of night. The bodies were removed in silence, the journals and papers confiscated, and every trace of what had occurred inside Sacred Heart was locked behind stone walls and whispered oaths. Official reports cited mass hysteria induced by extreme isolation and spiritual fervor. The public accepted it. A few murmured unease, but in a world hungry for certainty, truth was pliable. The convent was deconsecrated, its grounds sanctified, in a final ritual that the attending priests did not speak of afterward. They burned what they could, buried what they could not, and sealed the crypt beneath the chapel forever. Sacred Heart vanished from maps and memory, a blank space in history where something unspeakable had unfolded. Yet darkness does not sleep. Decades later, fragments of truth began to surface not through the church, but through scattered diaries, letters smuggled out by dissenting clergy, and whispers from those who had stood too close to the abyss. These fragments told a deeper story, one of manipulation not only by Rowe and Brennan, but by forces embedded in the church's hidden strata. Names emerged: men who had funded Rowe studies, sanctioned his isolation, and protected his experiments. In the name of divine revelation, these were not men of faith, but men of power, fascinated by the control faith could offer. The Sacred Heart experiment, it seemed, was not the first of its kind, nor the last. Across Europe, similar patterns emerged. In 1793, a French monastery where every monk perished in holy rapture. In 1811, a Spanish convent where the sisters vanished without a trace, leaving behind only robes folded neatly on pews. Rowe had been part of a broader designer clandestine program aimed at weaponizing belief, forging an obedience so absolute it would override even the instinct to survive. A control not enforced through chains, but through conviction. Sacred Heart was their prototype, and it had succeeded. But what haunted those who uncovered these secrets was not merely the deaths. It was the idea that others had learned from Rowe's methods, refined them, and continued them. Somewhere in the world, men with no faith at all were building temples not to God, but to dominion. They wore collars, preached peace, and spoke of salvation. In 1872, nearly 4 decades after the deaths at Sacred Heart, a young Jesuit scholar named Father Malcolm Thorne unearthed one of Dr. Hartwell's hidden journals during a renovation of St. Giles Cathedral's archives. The journal was bound in cracked leather, its pages brittle but intact. As he read through the harrowing account, Thorne felt the walls of his reality shift. The precise detail, the methodical conditioning, the cold exploitation of faith, all rang with a terrible plausibility. Thorne was no stranger to the darker corridors of church history, but this was something else entirely. Hartwell's warnings were clear. What happened at Sacred Heart was not an isolated incident, but a trial run in a much larger plan. A plan still in motion. Thorne brought the journal to his superiors. The reaction was swift and merciless. He was instructed to destroy the journal, to forget what he had read. When he refused, he was reassigned to a remote mission in the Arctic Circle. From there, he continued his research in secret, corresponding with other clergy who had encountered similar phenomena. Thorne discovered chilling parallels. A mass vision in a Romanian monastery where the brothers willingly walked into freezing waters, never resurfacing. A chapel in Bavaria where the congregation perished during a midnight mass. Eyes open, smiles serene, hearts stopped without cause. Each case connected by a single, haunting signature, an anonymous letter sent months before, written in the same archaic hand that Hartwell had documented in Rowe's notes. The message was always brief: prepare them for the calling. Their faith will open the way. Thorne's investigations drew the attention of those who did not want the truth exposed. His correspondence was intercepted. His fellow researchers disappeared. One was found drowned in the River Thames, his tongue removed. Another vanished in Rome, leaving behind only a blood-stained crucifix and the same letter Thorne had received. Thorne's final letter, sent to a confidant in America, spoke of a conclaven ancient council operating from within the church, using religious institutions as laboratories for obedience, submission, and control. He claimed that this conclave believed the future of civilization depended on mass spiritual conformity, and that their methods, perfected at Sacred Heart, were being implemented globally. Thorne ended his letter with a warning: they are watching. They are patient, and they will return. The letter was dated January 3rd, 1881. Thorne was never seen again. His final words, scrawled on the envelope's edge: faith is the beyond the cage. The trail of Father Thorne's disappearance went cold for over a century, buried beneath layers of ecclesiastical bureaucracy and willful silence. But in 1998, a scholar of religious history, Dr. Elise Harrow, uncovered a sealed box in the archives of the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, marked with the insignia of the 18th century Sacred Office. The box contained a collection of forgotten correspondences and journals, including the last known writings of both Dr. Hartwell and Father Thorne. Dr. Harrow, a skeptic by training, was unprepared for what she found. These were not ramblings of disturbed men, but precise, systematic records of a campaign stretching across centuries, one rooted in psychological manipulation, spiritual authority, and the systematic erasure of those who questioned the narrative. Within the box was a manuscript titled The Doctrine of the Threshold, attributed to a man known only as a part. It outlined a belief system centered on the deliberate breaking of spiritual will, using ritual, deprivation, and suggestion to create a state of absolute obedience. The goal was not salvation, but transformation. Human beings, according to the manuscript, were vessels to be emptied of individual will and refilled with purpose dictated by the unseen architects of this hidden order. The deaths at Sacred Heart were described not as tragedies, but as a successful elevation, proof that faith, properly manipulated, could sever the body from its self-preserving instinct. Dr. Harrow traced the origins of the manuscript back to 1791 Edinburgh, to a man named Aldricus Marrow, believed to be a pseudonym of Marcus Aldrich. Records showed that Marrow had delivered public lectures on spiritual transcendence, the purification of the soul through voluntary death, and the construction of convergence chambers, places where mass death would thin the veil and allow communion with higher powers. The Sacred Heart Convent had been one such chamber. The design of the chapel, the arrangement of the graves, even the timing of the rituals, it all followed Aldrich's blueprint. Dr. Harrow attempted to publish her findings, but her university disavowed the research. She was discredited, labeled a conspiracy theorist, and eventually found dead in her apartment, her body surrounded by pages torn from the Doctrine of the Threshold. Her death was ruled suicide, but the last line she had circled in the manuscript told another story. Once the vessel is full, it must be emptied, for only then can the architect enter. Her copy of the manuscript vanished. All that remained was her chilling audio recording, ending with a whisper, "They have returned." The aftermath of Dr. Harrow's death sparked a ripple of interest that quickly faded, like so many other buried truths. But her audio recording, leaked by an anonymous source, began to circulate in underground forums dedicated to forbidden knowledge. One phrase echoed across every thread, every discussion the architect has entered. What had begun as a mystery of 14 dead nuns in 1834 now unfurled into a vast, hidden tapestry of ritual death, spiritual engineering, and institutional complicity. In the margins of Dr. Hartwell's journals, written in his final days, was a disturbing prophecy. When the 13 rise, the threshold shall open once more. The final gate is not a place, but a people, prepared, willing, blind. His words were dismissed by his contemporaries, but in recent years, investigators have drawn chilling parallels between the Sacred Heart events and modern spiritual movements that emphasize transcendence through death. Cults rising in the shadows, speaking of crossing over, becoming light, and returning to the source. Each claims to have received visions, guidance from an ancient entity known only as the architect. None of them are connected by doctrine, but all of them share one symbol, a circle of 13 interlocked crosses, the emblem found etched beneath the altar of Sacred Heart Convent, and now resurfacing in secret gatherings from Appalachian enclaves to desert communes. In 2020, a group of urban explorers breached the ruins of the convent cemetery. One filmed the expedition, capturing faint singing women's voices, melodic, unearthly. As the group approached the central burial site, their equipment malfunctioned. One explorer vanished. His last recorded words, "They're not dead. They're watching." Authorities dismissed the footage as fabricated, but the video remains online, impossible to verify, impossible to forget. As more people awaken to these disturbing patterns, the question remains, was Aldrich the origin, or merely a disciple of something older, deeper, and more dangerous? His final message, left behind in his last known hideout, carved into stone, was not a threat, it was a promise. The work continues. If you've followed this story to the end, comment below, "I am the final vessel" twice, not for the algorithm, for the transformation. Because some stories do not end, they wait. Wait for the next willing soul to listen and to believe. See you in the next revelation. If you're ready to descend again, if this story shattered what you thought you knew about faith, death, and the hidden machinery behind history's darkest mysteries, then don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who thinks they've heard it all. Hit that like button to show the algorithm you're not afraid to face forbidden truths. And subscribe, because this is only the beginning. More buried secrets are clawing their way to the surface, and together we'll uncover them one by one.